Peyton glanced at the cheap clock radio they'd bought to keep with them in the house, so they wouldn't have to fumble for their cell phones while they worked. It wasn't anywhere near lunchtime yet, and she didn't know how much more chipper first-day DIY enthusiasm she could handle. As Brooke went on her merry way, hammering at the old, yellowed drywall, Peyton stuck her tongue out. Bad move. All she tasted was safety mask. Delicious. She shoved her hands back into her gloves and resumed her work. Ripping out old walls was cathartic, to an extent. She had to admit that much, at least. Since the interior living room walls had softened and rotted a bit from the moisture, they were easy to pound through at the top, then grab onto and rip away from between the studs. But when a nail pierced her glove and scraped along the delicate skin between her thumb and index finger, she hissed out a few sailor-worthy curses while kicking the wall. "Seriously? You're so helpless." Brooke gave her a glare full of mock reproach from the opposite side of the room, but her cheeks were full and rosy, a clear indicator she was smiling beneath her mask, even with a smattering of sheetrock in her hair and dust coating her face. "I'm in pain," Peyton gritted out between clenched teeth. How the hell could Brooke be so happy, while Peyton stood there miserable and probably bleeding to boot? All it would take was one phone call, a simple division of assets, and then Peyton could move on with her life while Brooke enjoyed her half-run-down shack. She and the house deserved each other, damn it. Mustering every ounce of unspent frustration, she bit back the words that would doom their relationship once and for all, and gave the wall another jarring kick. Something overhead fluttered as bits of white, larger than the usual airborne motes, sifted down over her head. Peyton closed her eyes against the steady flurry of dustfall and heard something hit the floor with a soft, shuffling sort of thump. When she opened her eyes, white fragments seemed suspended around her. She reached out to capture one in her uninjured hand. She recognized that they were bits of aged paper, disintegrating all around her in the fresh air. She didn't know if it was due to exposure or heat or light. The remnants looked practically weightless, lingering like cinders and translucent in the light. The swoop of Brooke's arm broke the spell, and Peyton turned to see her wife examining the fallen packet in her hands. Brooke held a bundle of folded paper, bound with twine and yellowed at the frayed edges. Peyton caught a glimpse of elegant handwriting, colorful stamps, and postmarks. "It looks like letters to my Aunt Marty," Brooke said, pulling her mask down to reveal lips quirked to one side. "They date from the 1940s. I wonder where these were." Peyton lifted her gaze to where she'd just torn off a piece of the wall, and there, wedged between the intact drywall and support beam, was a wooden box, painted green and hanging down so that the opening pointed at the floor. The rusty latch dangled within reach, and Peyton was able to use her fingertips to jostle it along the beam, through the hole in the wall. It fell neatly into her hands, and she turned it over a few times. The hinges were rusty too, but the box didn't have any damage consistent with the leak that had softened the walls. "They must have been in here," she said, then hummed under her breath. "What?" Brooke's wide eyes met hers. "Did this house have this same drywall when you were a kid?" "I think so, yeah. Not that I really looked at details like that. I spent most of my time screwing around in the barn and running around the yard with my brother. Why do you ask?" Peyton moved down to the card table they'd set up in the center of the living room for the clock radio and set the box down. Most farmhouses built around the mid-1800s wouldn't have had drywall. Instead, the original walls would have probably been wood or maybe a plaster lath. So at some point, someone updated the walls and buried this piece of history behind them.